Gina, if you could just give me a thumbs up when you think we're ready to go. Oh, I see thumbs up
Okay.
across. All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're calling in from. My name is Katie Wu. I'm a senior fellow with GridWorks. We're facilitating this microgrid technical conference on behalf of the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. Welcome and thank you for being here. I want to invite Commissioner Potter to make some opening remarks as we're getting started today.
Thank you so much, Katie, and good morning, almost afternoon. It's a pleasure to see so many of you returning back to discuss this docket. And a few new names have popped up as well, and so welcome. We're very happy to have you join our conversation here and our kickoff to phase 2. So I just actually listened in on the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. They're holding a legislative briefing, and I can't tell you how many times the word microgrids came up, in particular in talking about Hawaii's transition to a renewable energy future, as well as resiliency and serving the needs of our communities. So this is a pressing issue. It's a timely issue, and we're right at the cusp of it. And so very excited to get started again. It's been a little bit of a break since we've had meetings for this docket, but we are excited to dive into what I think is the meat and potatoes of what this docket is really about and what Act 200 was really about. And when we think about microgrids, we can think about a number of different benefits and how our energy systems operate and the resiliency that they can provide to end-of-the-line customers. They can also provide social equity benefits and reliability to disadvantaged or remote populations, as well as thinking of the economic benefits that are available to customers that are part of a microgrid. And so it's also really important to consider that microgrids our systems are not separate. We don't have like an electric system that's separate from the gas system, that's separate from the water system. In a lot of cases, those lines overlap, and they need each other to provide services throughout our communities. And so there is a real system integration, and the microgrids can help support that system integration and help provide wastewater and water in times of when we have power outages for prolonged periods of time. So there's a great deal of work that we need to do here to define how we want our microgrid service tariff to proceed. We can discuss opportunities for private-public partnerships, and our staff has provided a list of issues, a statement of issues that we'd like to really jump into and for us to consider throughout this second phase of the proceeding. So thank you so much for being here. What we've done is we've asked my GridWorks to assemble a group of experts and to tell us their stories about the microgrids that they've developed throughout the country, and also the best practices when thinking about how to develop a microgrid tariff and the benefits and the value streams associated with it. And so GridWorks has done that, and we have some wonderful speakers that have lined up to discuss these topics with us today. And I want to thank everyone so much for their time and contributions to this technical conference, and look forward to hearing from everyone. And Katie, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you so much again. All right, bye.
Thanks, Commissioner. So just a high-level overview of our agenda today. We're currently in our welcome and opening remarks. Staff will give a brief presentation on the priority topics and scope of Phase 2 that was recently sent out via the docket. And then, as Commissioner Potter shared, I'll be presenting on best practices that we've been finding from recent microgrid experiences in other jurisdictions. There also will be a panel of experts to talk about the experience in California and share some of the experience in developing and operating microgrids. We'll have a brief break after that. Parties will then provide their presentations of what's happened with the current Microgrid Services Tariff, as well as to hear their feedback on the priority issues. And then we'll have some discussion amongst all of us about what priority issues want to be emphasized, what might be missing from the list, and to help the Commission staff continue to scope out Phase 2. Before we move on to staff's presentation, I just want to check in if Chair Griffin, if you want to make any statements before we embark in the rest of the technical conference.
Thanks, everyone. I think Commissioner Potter covered things pretty well. I want to thank you all for your participation. And thank you also for picking up the laboring ore from here. We look forward to all the good work of the collective group here. And I think, again, Commissioner Potter highlighted the importance of this topic. I was listening in on the session this morning as well. And certainly given our recent weather events as well, we look forward to the need and work of the group here. So with that, turn it back. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Andrew or Gina, I'm not sure who's giving the staff presentation. I will defer to you on that.
I believe I will be doing it today. Let me get the presentation going, share my desktop. Okay. Okay, everyone can see the slides, right?
Not yet for me.
Okay. So share not going through.
Still can't see anything. Yeah.
What's going on? Okay. Screen 3. Oh, that's why. Okay. Okay, so let's get down to it. So we took some of the phase two objectives and took initial scope of the issues, and we have some proposed priority topics to address today, or not to address today, that we think should be addressed in the course of this proceeding, this phase of the proceeding. Note that one of the objectives for phase two includes continuing development of the tariff. This includes both promoting self-sufficiency and resilience, and further streamlining of the tariff where applicable. Also, we would like to enhance the tariff to provide to support broader use of microgrids in other non-emergency situations, such as enabling voluntary islanding or islanding as a normal mode of operation. Third, we would like to explore additional opportunities to support resiliency through microgrid development, as namely to encourage development of microgrids that can provide basically power to communities and other critical facilities within the scope of that microgrid. Fourth, we would also like to identify grid services that can be provided by microgrids. Just to review, these actually are the same objectives as outlined in the Commission's guidance letter that we filed on September 21st, 2021. So these are not new. Okay, so here are the proposed priority topics. First, we wanted to address microgrid compensation grid services. Namely, we wanted to harmonize with other programs' grid service mechanisms, and we wanted to basically clarify how customers will operate with existing DER or DR grid service agreements. And lastly, within this topic, we wanted to really talk about and develop resiliency services and compensation, including societal environmental value, or considering the societal environmental value. Second, among the priority topics is addressing utility compensation, such as standby charges, exit fees, or other charges that may be due to the utility. And then third, we wanted to talk about or address customer protection related considerations. And that's all the slides we have for this topic. Katie, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Before we move on, there will be time as we move through the technical conference to hear from parties what your responses and reactions to staff's priority topics are, but are there any clarification questions before we move on? Okay, hearing none, we'll just speed right along then into best practices presentation. And oh, wonderful. Thank you. All right. So thank you again to the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission for having us here and for all of the stakeholders for being here. Again, my name is Katie Wu. I'm a senior fellow with GridWorks. We're a small nonprofit supporting stakeholder facilitation in the energy industry. And today I'll be sharing some best practices for microgrid development and lessons learned from other jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So as Andrew just shared, the phase 2 objectives are to promote self-sufficiency and resilience among microgrid operators and to further streamline the microgrid tariff where applicable. And so for this presentation, my hope is to refresh for all stakeholders best practices to consider as we're all moving into phase 2 of the docket, and to advance the conversation to support Hawaii in promoting microgrid development. So the best practices that I'm going to share today primarily relate to this first objective, this first phase 2 objective, to promote self-sufficiency and resilience amongst microgrid operators. And we will have a panel following this presentation as well. I hope the panelists will be able to dive in a little bit further of their experience with these best practices. Next slide, please. So this is just a high-level summary of what I'm about to walk through. That the best practices for microgrid development now are first to understand your needs and options, understand what your electric grid system needs, understand what your community needs are, and to develop a suite of options that may potentially be able to meet those needs, including microgrids as well as other alternative options. Once you've identified those options of solutions, relatedly is to ensure that microgrids meet your needs. So even while you may have identified that microgrids are the optimal solution for your need, it's still just best practice due diligence to ensure that microgrids can really provide those services that you're seeking. Third is to put customers first. I think if folks did call into that Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, I think we heard a lot about the need to put customers first, realize what the community needs are so that your solutions are designed to meet those needs that may extend beyond energy needs as well. Next is to track quantitative and qualitative metrics. And finally, to structure upfront and long-term funding streams for your microgrid projects. So let's dive in. So beginning with understanding your needs and options, I mean, this sounds pretty simple, and I think that it's just sort of a best practice as you're identifying electric grid solutions in a very complex environment. But to begin with identifying the need and identifying then a suite of solutions or potential solutions that could meet those needs. A couple of examples I want to highlight are the North Coast Resiliency Initiative in California, which is a state-led initiative to identify projects that can help to mitigate wildfire risk, or the associated public safety power shutoff events that occur along the north coast of California. The initiative brings together key agencies and stakeholders that are working together to develop a comprehensive PSPS, Public Safety Power Shutoff Mitigation Plan, and considering new energy resource development, transmission upgrades, and related changes to the distribution system, all as part of their suite of potential solutions to enable a resiliency need, or to meet their resiliency need. Similarly, out in Vermont, Green Mountain Power's recent climate plan introduces the concept of a resiliency zone, which includes measures to increase resiliency in local, often geographically isolated or remote areas. The utility is partnering directly with customers to identify and define their resiliency needs. So far, 4 communities have been selected as initial resiliency zones based on reliability data, communications and broadband connectivity data, and Center for Disease Control social vulnerability indicators. And Green Mountain Power is now partnering with those communities to identify specific resiliency zone improvements, including solar plus storage at an elementary school that also serves as an emergency shelter, and battery storage for homes in remote areas with poor communications connectivity. So these are just a couple of examples of where state initiatives or utility initiatives are defining a whole suite of options to meet their resiliency needs. Next slide, please. And so once you've identified your needs and your options for solutions, if microgrids are coming up as a priority solution to meet your need, it is best practice to then just continue to ensure or take that extra due diligence step to ensure that microgrids are able to meet your needs more completely and cost effectively than other solutions. And I want to highlight the Red Hook Community Microgrid project that's out in Brooklyn, New York. This project originated in the wake of Superstorm Sandy, as state and local agencies and community-based organizations were assessing their options for storm recovery and improving community resilience. So the community had identified that they want microgrids as a solution for improving resiliency, but they are still running a feasibility study to assess if and how a microgrid can improve resiliency for critical facilities. So even after identifying that they wanted this microgrid, they still sought funding to conduct this feasibility study. Next slide, please. So following on to that, once you've identified that microgrid is your desired solution and that the microgrid is able to meet your needs, I think it's important to come back to ensuring that we're putting the customer's needs first. And that can be done through empowering communities to direct project development and define microgrid project objectives, design, and locations. An example out of Puerto Rico is the Resilient Power Puerto Rico, which is a nonprofit working directly with communities to provide funding, equipment, training, education, and technical assistance to encourage microgrid development. And they do that in working directly with community-based organizations and training them to better understand the energy needs within their communities, to design energy systems, and developing funding proposals. So through Resilient Power Puerto Rico, they're really empowering local communities and residents there to define what their energy needs are, to design solutions for those needs, and to develop funding proposals so that they're driving this project development and they have sort of buy-in and support for their community project. PG&E's Microgrid Community Enablement Program is another example of where the utility is putting customers' needs first and engaging with communities to define what they want from microgrids in their region. And I believe our representative from PG&E will speak to that a little bit later on our panel. All right. Next is to track quantitative and qualitative metrics. I think this is important for any energy program or any energy project to identify, measure, and track quantitative and qualitative metrics to determine how microgrids are meeting those defined needs. This example comes from the Resilience Working Group report, which was a working group part of the Integrated Grid Planning docket. This is just an example of a resilience index and how a resilience index could be developed. So we've heard a lot about the need for microgrids to meet resiliency needs in geographically isolated areas or areas that may be sensitive or exposed to natural disasters. And so if a microgrid is developed to improve resiliency in that community, tracking something like a resilience index before, during, and after development of the project is important to ensure that that project is indeed meeting the defined need. Next slide. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about structuring upfront and long-term funding streams. I think it's no surprise that microgrids are very capital-intensive projects, but it's not just the upfront capital that needs incentives or needs investment. I think it's the ongoing operation of that microgrid as well that will need revenue streams to ensure that it's a long-term solution for those communities. And one example from an avocado packing facility out in California, that microgrid project included funding streams that included direct investment by the project developer and owner, quarterly payments from the facility to the system owner, upfront incentives through the California Solar Generation Incentive Program. Ongoing revenue stream was through bill savings generated through the facility's demand management software. And the project team was also looking at identifying longer-term finance streams akin to Green Charge Network's use of power efficiency agreements. And pardon me, I'm still learning about what this means. As I understand, it's a grouping of resources, a bundling of resources as demand response resources that in California can be bid into the CAISO market. So I think that as an industry, folks are thinking about creative long-term solutions for ongoing revenue streams and microgrids, and there's a lot to learn and a lot of experience that can be applied in Hawaii as well. Lastly, on this slide, I just want to also highlight that in California, California has an electric program investment charge program, which funds extensive R&D in the energy industry and is funded through ratepayer dollars. In a decade of research on microgrids, the program has invested in 39 microgrids with 90 million in ratepayer funds and 71 million in match funding. And so when projects apply for EPIC funds, they are awarded points for having match funding and as a means to sort of give them a competitive advantage when they are pursuing research, ratepayer funded research as well. So that may be something that Hawaii wants to consider as well. Next slide. All right, so I hope that this has at least spurred some thought for you all on what best practices might be a good fit for Hawaii. Hawaii has so many options for providing renewable resources, and I just want to emphasize how important it is to consider what specific and unique value add that microgrids provide before committing to that project, and the importance also of working with the community to ensure that it's what they want and what they need as well. So thank you all for your attention, and I will happy to take any questions or reflections on what you all have heard in that best practices overview.
Thanks for the presentation, Katie. Good to see you and great to hear from you. I'm wondering, is the presentation going to be made available to parties to spend more time with some of the examples you shared?
Yes, I believe so. If they're not already on the document management system, I think they will be in the next couple of days. But Ashley, would you mind confirming?
Yes, Katie's presentation as well as all of the presentations should be available on DMS right now, actually.
Okay, the GridWorks presentation is as well?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Any other questions or reactions, reflections? All right. So I think we are running a little bit ahead of schedule, but perhaps that's okay. Let me check in with Claire. Claire Hallbrook, who's a new director with GridWorks, or maybe not so new anymore, will be leading our panel of experts in the next section.
Yes, thank you, Katie. I see we've got our speakers on, so I think we can get it started. Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Hallbrook. As Katie mentioned, I'm director at GridWorks. In addition to the sort of high-level best practices presentation Katie provided to all of you, I've organized a panel in which some individuals with a bit more technical experience in microgrid tariffs and microgrid development will be speaking. I think we're all familiar that microgrid technologies aren't particularly new, but the concept of third-party owned microgrids that require the development of a tariff, I think, is still an evolving concept across the country. Luckily, we have some colleagues in California who have agreed to speak with us today. We have representative from the Public Utilities Commission in California, from Pacific Gas and Electric Company, as well as from the Schatz Energy Research Center. I'll let each of them introduce themselves and go into their presentations, but really looking forward to some of their perspective on handling a lot of the issues that Hawaii is looking to address as well. What I'll go ahead and do is I'll turn it over in just a second, but please feel free to put any questions in the chat as we go through the panelist presentation. At the end, I'll make sure we get to all of your questions, and I will also maybe follow up with a few of my own for discussion. All right, so if we can please give Roseanne the floor. Did you want to share your slides, or would you like us to pull them up? All right, I see the slides, and I see Roseanne here. Are you on double mute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Great.
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Roseanne Rutkiewicz, and I'm a senior regulatory analyst with the Grid Resiliency and Microgrids team and the Energy Division at the California Public Utilities Commission. And I'm going to be talking today to you about how the CPUC is approaching the concept of resiliency evaluation through a resiliency planning and evaluation process, if you will. So to start, I want to talk a little bit about the problems that we are looking to solve. Our vulnerable communities, indeed all of our communities, are becoming more impacted by increasing climate change disruptions. And in terms of resilience, the problem that we see to solve becomes how to optimize our grid investments to maximize resiliency and balance that with our other policy goals like reliability, safety, equity, and decarbonization. As we attempt to answer this question, we need to keep in mind certain things. First, the climate change disruptions that used to be low frequency are now becoming more frequent with higher intensity. So they're becoming high frequency, high impact events. At the same time, the impact of these events are different for those at opposite ends of the equity and wealth spectrum. And these disruptions are highlighting the interdependencies of our critical infrastructure systems. And all of this at a time when it's critical to shift to our decarbonized electrification systems. But in order to do this in the face of these climate change disruptions, we really need to make sure that we are increasing the confidence in our electrification. So no small feat. In our discussions with Resiliency and Microgrids Working Group, we first looked at ways in which researchers have looked at the issue of resiliency. And in this graph, we first developed by Pantelli when he was looking at the transmission line outages in the UK after a windstorm. We can see that resiliency can be seen as a series of phases in response to a disruption: preparation, adaptation, which incorporates the magnitude and the time of the disruption on the system being studied, and recovery. So resiliency can be looked at then from the perspective of measuring the difference between the baseline case, or the floor when it drops to the x-axis, and the improvements to that drop, which would be represented here by the dotted line, with the goal to be moving this line up to that small dotted line at the very top where there is no shift in system function. While this schematic was developed as it relates to the electric transmission system, we can use this model to also look at the interdependencies of our societal, economic, and environmental functions and how they relate to each other using the common variable of time. So let's look at the simplified version. Actually, I'm going to go back to that just a second. So these are the energy systems on the left, is the graph indicating the different kinds of energy system functions, or different kinds of system functions that we could graph onto this. And then now I'm going to show how they can relate to each other. So it's taking a simplified version of an anecdotal case study to get more visibility into these indirect impacts of power outages. I'm using this chart to observe how a disruption in the electrical energy system impacts two other factors for a low-income family. This slide depicts the effect of two outages in 1 month on a family's food supply and income. The food supply is the yellow graph, and the income is the green graph behind the blue. The blue is the electrical system. The family is in a very low income bracket in California Bay Area. And using time as the common denominator, one can see in this graph the effect of a 3-day outage in the beginning of the month. The electrical system was restored to original capacity, but the food supply resulted in the family having to depend on food supplies at a local food bank for quite a while. At the same time, because of the outage, work was lost for those same 3 days, affecting their monthly income. This income was not recovered. At the end of the month, another longer outage occurred, resulting in another loss of food supply and 5 days of work lost this time. So looking at three different system functions in relationship to each other provides some perspective on the impact of the outage that lasts a lot longer than the outage itself. So being able to assess the impacts of these indirect impacts of electrical energy outages is a key component to determining and thinking about the value of resiliency. So mitigation measures implemented might change the profile of these interrelated system functions. So seen here is a hypothetical example of the difference that might be seen in the related functions with mitigation measures that reduce the duration of the power outage to, say, 1 day, which perhaps also keeps the neighborhood grocery store powered up, allowing the community to obtain ice for their home use, and maintains the power to the family's workplace. So while some food is seen to be lost in that second layer, it's more quickly replenished, and income isn't seen as significantly impacted. So similar results occur at the second outage at the end of the month. So being able to assess the change in these indirect impacts of electrical energy outages is also a key component to determining not only the value of resiliency, but the cost effectiveness of our mitigation measures that we choose in our resiliency planning. So when conducting the Resiliency and Microgrid Working Group discussion series on the value of resiliency, we wanted to take our regulator hat off for a little bit and look at the issue of resiliency from a holistic point of view. So in doing so, we discussed a resiliency planning and evaluation process, sort of a template that could be applied at a scalable, sequential, and methodical approach by which resiliency could be assessed, mitigation measures could be compared and optimized, and resiliency responses could be assessed for effectiveness, and resiliency efforts can be incrementally improved. So essentially, these 4 pillars were baseline assessment. What do we want to protect? Where is it? What threatens them? And how well are we doing to protect it? Mitigation measure assessment. What protection options do we have? What does the best job at protecting it, and what does it cost? And then a resiliency scorecard. So what are those resiliency configuration characteristics that such that we can judge and choose based on not only just cost and effectiveness in terms of supporting our targets, but also how much do they support our state policy goals, such as greenhouse gas reduction, decarbonization, equity, et cetera, and reliability. So the general idea with this methodology is that it's scalable and that it could be applied to a specific small application like a single customer solution, or as large as a utility territory's assessment of mitigation strategies. So agnostic in this methodology is that microgrids in this methodology are considered as just one of potential mitigation strategies. So it's also important to note that in Pillar 1, this baseline assessment, it should be heavily conducted with collaboration of local communities to determine the accuracy and ground truthing of what otherwise might be publicly available or utility provided data. So we're still in the process of determining what metrics are most applicable and what regulatory steps that we need to take to embed a quantitative analytical framework of resilience evaluation and planning into our grid planning processes. But this gives you an idea of the logical approach that we're taking towards this issue. We're looking at developing metrics that might measure social burden index and combining that with longer and shorter term economic outage costs and integrating that with our affordability metrics that we developed at the CPUC, just to give you an idea of some of the metrics that we're looking at to, and then embed these into our resiliency and reliability grid planning processes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Roseanne. Really appreciate that presentation. Again, we'll do a little Q&A at the end of all of the presentations. Feel free to write anything in the chat, or when we get to the end, you can raise your hand. So next in our panel is Jeremy Donnell from Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Jeremy, would you like us to pull up the slides, or do you want to share them?
I will give it a go. I made a couple changes.
Perfect.
One moment. I'll have to warn everyone, every single time that I try to share on WebEx, it's a disaster, so bear with me for a moment. I think I may have gotten it right on the first try for once.
Not a disaster at all, Jeremy.
Give it time, it'll happen. Good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you all. My name is Jeremy Donnell. I'm the Senior Manager overseeing resiliency and microgrids and microgrid strategy and implementation. So really all things microgrids from strategy and policy regulatory proceedings all the way down to our plans for implementing them or within my portfolio. And so let me just dive right in here. I wanted to start with a slide that we presented to the California Public Utility Commission's Resiliency and Microgrids Working Group over a year ago now, November 4th, 2020. And we were really trying to build our credibility by referencing the fact that we look towards you all here in Hawaii to build our thinking around our microgrid tariff and our resiliency policy, et cetera. And so I really just want to say it's flattering to be back here talking to you all about the things that we've done. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we really learned a lot from you all. So thank you. So what do we do with all of that knowledge? I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. This basically says that we've caught up largely to where you are. We're on somewhat different tracks, California and Hawaii, but there's more similar than different. In establishing our community microgrid enablement tariff, we took a real principle-based approach. And we said, okay, what needs to underpin any tariff? And we set out those principles, and then we developed 2 agreements to support those principles and to enable communities to develop a microgrid over PG&E's grid. So there's 2 components, our community microgrid enablement tariff and the microgrid operating agreement. Collectively, what they do is they set out the eligibility and the processes for applying, the studies that need to be done, and then the operational protocols and procedures, roles and responsibilities, how to maintain safety, et cetera. Sorry, I lost a point that I wanted to make. But what our tariff does is really just allows a community that wants to raise their hand and say, we want to build a microgrid that's a partnership with the utility, using community resources and the utility infrastructure to form community level resilience. We want to make that happen. We want to partner with our communities that are trying to realize their energy goals all the way from green energy through to resiliency. And so that's the intent of this tariff. Given that I don't feel like we're that far ahead, if at all, on this, I'm actually not going to dwell on this slide much more other than to say thank you for all of the guidance that we got from Hawaii in developing our tariff. Where I want to spend the bulk of my time is thinking about is sharing some of my thinking on, okay, what's the next step? We have a tariff out there in the wild, but that's not good enough alone to drive resiliency into our communities. And so I'm going to talk here about the fact that there are many pathways to resiliency in my view, and it's essential that we think about what is the optimal way to drive resilience into our communities, or the optimal portfolio of options, and when are they deployed? I appreciated GridWorks' best practices. The first one was understand your needs and your options, and that's largely what I'm going to talk about here. So what I have here is, on the left-hand side, I have certain considerations that come to mind for me when I think about how should utility funded is the phrase that I use here. Really, you could think about it as just publicly funded, public monies. How should they be directed towards resilience? What's the optimal format? And here again, I think about certain certain principles or facts that come into play. I'm not going to go through these in great detail. I'll group several of them into certain messages. The first one really says that resiliency needs are geographically specific. And what I saw earlier, presented by, I think it was the Hawaii PUC, showed that it looks like you've already done some of that work to go through your various communities and understand what the threats are to them, and to rank those. And so that's a very important first step. The second through fourth bullets really cover the fact that customer needs are different. The threats to the overall area are one thing, but the impact to the customers and what the customers really need with respect to resilience can be quite different. And Roseanne spoke a little bit about this earlier. The fifth bullet discussed, I think, the critical issue here. Resilience investments are a scarce resource and should be carefully managed. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Hawaii probably does not have enough money to deliver resiliency for every single customer in need of resiliency. I know that's true in California in spades. And so what that means is we have to think carefully about how we're spending each dollar, make sure that it's deployed to the highest priority targets in the most cost-effective manner. And that really gets into the next bullet here. Our investment should be solution and technology agnostic for the most part. Of course, we can't throw like renewables policy and all of that out the window, but as long as you're staying within other major policy objectives, let's figure out what's most effective at meeting community needs while managing costs and has the appropriate kind of cost-benefit analysis. And then, of course, the utility-funded resiliency considerations shouldn't block anyone else from choosing to deploy resiliency elsewhere. So when I think about PG&E's prioritization, we have certain funding that we can deploy against resiliency needs. Actually, let me back up for a moment. I mentioned every single customer has a positive value of resilience. There may be a customer somewhere in our community that wants to deploy resilience, a community, but unfortunately, PG&E just simply can't afford to do it there. They're not high on the priority list or high enough to meet to make the cut for our limited funding. We want pathways for those customers, and that's really what our CMET tariff and our community microgrid enablement program are rooted in. So moving right along quickly here, there's so much litigation that goes on at each Public Utilities Commission that addresses all sorts of issues, and particularly rate making and cost allocation issues. Just because there's a microgrid in place, one should not throw that out the window. and just, or at least if that's done, for example, standby charges or otherwise are exempted, there should be an explicit recognition that that is a cost. That's a hidden cost of resiliency. Those dollars then end up on other customers' bills, and affordability issues are exacerbated. So in my view, avoiding cost allocations is not the right way to go. Just figure out what the benefits are of resiliency and compensate those, and then also just make an explicit decision where we're going to say we are going to hand dollars to a microgrid or other resiliency initiative and have it be upfront and transparent. And then lastly, this one's fairly obvious. You know, we need to maximize the resiliency value per dollar invested. So all of this comes down to careful prioritization of needs, and matching of solutions to needs maximizes total societal resiliency. And so on the right here, you see when, as the utility, I look at what are our options in our toolkit for any particular need. We're able to look across grid hardening, grid solutions, utility microgrids, of which we have plenty, and then customer level resilience programs as well. And then we're also seeking to foster community-driven resilience by enabling behind-the-meter microgrids, community microgrids, and even our new microgrid incentive program will be launched here shortly. And so what that allows us to do as the central planners to be able to say, okay, first, how do we prioritize across all of our customers? And then second, what is the best solution for those highest priority investments and to drive down costs? One concern about just simply throwing a tariff into the wild and hoping that that will solve the problems is a tariff is there for customers to avail themselves of or when they want, but it doesn't really have the power to be able to prioritize across different investment opportunities. And it definitely does not have the ability to choose the optimal solution for a particular need. That it can be fairly inefficient. There should be just one tool in the toolkit. And so I unfortunately didn't time myself. I'm sure I'm out of time. We have our community microgrid enablement program. If folks have questions on
Your
that,
time, Jeremy.
I'd be happy to
No need to
answer those.
rush. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay.
We're ahead of schedule.
Okay, fair enough. So for our community microgrid enablement program, this one is near and dear to my heart. It was an idea that several of us came up with on the fly in 2019 as California was in the throes of the worst of our public safety power shutoffs. And we were putting a range of utility solutions to mitigate PSPS on the table, and we also wanted to create a pathway for communities that wanted to raise their hand and create their own resilience. We also wanted to just further the commercial microgrid space. And so we developed a program that has 4 pillars to it. The first is our enhanced tools and information. These are largely passive tools that customers can avail themselves of on our website. We have a guide that communities can read that helps them understand what are the basic steps to thinking about building a community microgrid, what should go into the consideration. And we also have a technical resource guide for those who are actually the ones who will design and build the microgrid that shares our best practices and information that they would need to know. And that gets combined with a suite of other tools that we have, our ICA, I don't know what ICA stands for, Interconnection Capacity Analysis. I think maps that help customers know where to cite DERs and other tools available to them. And then enhanced utility technical support is a dedicated group of folks that we have that support customers that are interested in a community microgrid. And this ranges from having a dedicated customer relationship manager, you could think of it, that is focused on the microgrid, that will support the community end to end from initial request all the way through to final commissioning of the microgrid. To build a microgrid, you have to engage with a number of different parties, processes and parties within the utility, and that I'm sure could be dizzying for our customers. So that individual is intended to really support the communities through that whole resilience initiative. Their formal title is Resilience Coordinator. And then we also have technical folks, engineers, who will be able to consult with the community on resilience needs and really understanding our grid, give them information about where transformers are, where reclosers might be sited within a microgrid, et cetera, and really consult with them on whether or not a microgrid makes sense, whether or not a microgrid is needed. Some of the best conversations that we have with communities is when they come and they say, we're thinking about building a community microgrid in this area. And we're able to tell them, you know what, great news, there's no need because you're building this microgrid due to PSPS, and we have a solution in the queue that we'll be deploying shortly. That's the best possible conversation because building a microgrid is long and difficult and requires invested time and money. So they walk away very happy when they hear that. Additionally, we have the multi-customer microgrid tariff. I'll jump to the bottom. We already talked about that. We wouldn't be able to do these community microgrids without that tariff. And then lastly, multi-customer microgrid cost offsets. And so what these are is the utility, PG&E will offset the cost of the electric distribution infrastructure that is necessary to enable the islanding function. This is the reclosers, the microgrid utility microgrid controller, upgrades necessary to make sure that the microgrid would be safe to operate in the event of a hazard event. In our case, oftentimes these microgrids will be sited in Tier 2, Tier 3 high fire threat districts. Thus, the utility would pay for undergrounding if necessary, so that way that microgrid can be safe to operate in when we have high fire threat weather conditions. And so this helps lower the cost for the community. What they do is they bring forth the generation, and then what the utility says is we will support you end to end in your development process, and the cost of making our infrastructure islandable is on us. Those offsets are tied to certain eligibility conditions. What the concept there was that we have we have a way of prioritizing the resiliency spend that we have. We set the eligibility conditions roughly aligned with our own prioritization for resiliency spend. So those communities that are eligible for the cost offsets are those that are building a microgrid in a public safety power shutoff affected area or a Tier 2, Tier 3 high fire threat district. And that microgrid must include a critical facility. That way we know that it's for the public benefit. And then by setting those criteria, we know that our publicly funded dollars, our utility funded dollars that come from all customers are being directed towards projects that have value to our communities. So with that, I'm done, Claire. Probably went twice over my allotted time. I apologize.
No, please,
thank you
please
again,
don't.
everyone.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was, I think, really informative and touches on a lot of issues I know that we've been discussing with Hawaii PUC staff. And I'll have a few follow-up questions for you once we're done here. With our last presentation, Jim, are you on the line? And do you want to share your slides?
I am, Claire, and let's see if I'm as successful as Jeremy was.
Hopefully give you some good luck.
Hopefully. Let's see, are you seeing my slides?
Yes, I am seeing your slides.
Good.
Go ahead.
You did a good job, Jeremy. I'm indebted to you forever. All right, so my name is Jim Zolik. I'm a principal engineer at the Schatz Energy Research Center at Cal Poly Humboldt, which that's kind of fun to say because Humboldt State, it used to be Humboldt State University, and the CSU system just became Cal Poly Humboldt earlier this week. So quite exciting development for us here in Humboldt. And I'm also, just want to thank you all for inviting me to speak today. I want to share with you about a specific microgrid project, community microgrid project, the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid that is the first front-of-the-meter multi-customer microgrid in PG&E's service territory. And so we'll talk about some of the lessons learned from that project. I've been working with Jeremy and a lot of folks on his team. So just to start out, give you a little bit of overview of the project itself. It's, as I said, the first front-of-the-meter multi-customer microgrid in PG&E's service territory. And I think what's important about that also, maybe it goes without saying, but is that the generation, the grid forming generation on this microgrid is owned and operated by a third party when the microgrid islands, this third party is energizing a section of PG&E's distribution grid. So that's a very unique and very complicated, and it's required some real intense work and partnership, and I'll talk a bit about that. So it's 100% renewable microgrid utilizing solar PV and battery storage. More specifically, it's a 2.2 megawatt PV system, DC coupled to a 2.2 megawatt, 8.8 megawatt hour battery, so a 4-hour battery. And it also includes 300 kW of behind the meter net energy metered PV. It is an end-of-the-line microgrid, so that simplifies things a little bit. It's not in the middle of a distribution circuit. There's only one islanding point that has to isolate the microgrid and put it in island mode. It serves 20 customer meters, and the main customers on the microgrid, and the reason the microgrid was located where it is that it serves the regional airport for Humboldt County and the broader area, and it also serves a U.S. Coast Guard sector Humboldt Bay Air Station, and I'll talk a little bit more about those and how critical they are to our area. It's a partnership between the distribution system operator, Pacific Gas and Electric, and our local community choice aggregator here in Northern California, the Redwood Coast Energy Authority. And it's a $11.6 million project funded by the California Energy Commission's Epic program. Actually, also some Epic funding through the PUC and the utilities through PG&E is helped to support their efforts. And then RCEA brought over half the funds to fund this project. Here you've got a picture on the left of the battery storage. It's 3 Tesla megapacks, and behind that we're looking at the backside of the PV modules. Not quite as picturesque, but that's the 2.2 megawatt. Actually, it's basically 2.5 megawatts because it's both the NEM system and the DC coupled system. It's about 7 acres of PV array. And then to the right, the map there shows you our location on the distribution grid. So this shows you where the California Redwood Coast Humboldt County Airport is. And inside that dashed line is the section of the distribution circuit that we are serving. So that's where the 20 accounts are located. Actually, on the north edge, it says CB Road there. That's where the Coast Guard station is located. So, Jeremy talked a bit about the microgrid tariffs that PG&E's been working on, and specifically the Community Microgrid Enablement Tariff and the Community Microgrid Enablement Program. The Redwood Coast Energy Airport Microgrid is really the beginnings of that tariff and that program. The project was conceived of and started well before the tariff and program, I think, were conceived of or certainly begun development of. And so, in part, those were developed to enable the Redwood Coast Airport Microgrid project and learn from some of the efforts in that project. So, in terms of the tariffs, covering the interconnection and operation of the generation assets that I've described, we can break it down into grid-connected operation and island operation. And in grid-connected operation, and I think Jeremy touched on this, there are standard tariffs and agreements that already apply for the interconnection and operation of these assets. So we utilize the wholesale distribution tariff and have executed a small generator interconnection agreement that covers the interconnection and operation of the wholesale generator, the battery and PV system. And then Rule 21 covers the net energy metered PV interconnection and operation, so the behind the meter system. And the customer, RCEA, the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, owns both of those generators, and they have full operational control of those generators in grid-connected operation under those existing tariffs and agreements. So there's nothing really new there, nothing all that exciting. It's pretty conventional piece of the project. the place where it's not so conventional is under islanded operation. And so when we looked at, okay, are there any tariffs or agreements that exist? The answer was no, there aren't really. And as Jeremy said, we looked to Hawaii and to a lot of the work that you had done to really, help provide some guidance to us. And so we worked closely with PG&E to develop the Community Microgrid Enablement Tariff and the Microgrid Operating Agreement that Jeremy talked about, which really specifies the detailed requirements, procedures, and protocols that are necessary for the operation of a multi-customer front-of-the-meter community microgrid. During islanded operation, the Redwood Coast Airport Microgrid project, PG&E maintains control of the islanded microgrid, and the PG&E's Distribution Control Center has visibility and control of the islanding switch for the microgrid and the breakers for the generation on the microgrid, and they can specify the transitions between grid connected and islanded operation to be either seamless or break before make. The plan is for those to be seamless, but they have the option there. And also the system is set up to be automated. So it doesn't require any operator interface, though it does allow operators to see and control things. But typically operation is intended to be automatic and based on agreed upon settings that are built into the logic of the microgrid controls. In addition to what I just covered there, as we were going through the work to develop tariffs and figure out all the things that needed to be in place, the question of how do we compensate for services during islanded operation came up. And our original strategy was to measure and track the energy flows and the grid services that are provided during islanded operation, and then to facilitate a means of fair compensation for these services. However, as we started to work on that, but we learned that the California ISO, Independent System Operator, would consider us in market at all times with our wholesale generator, even when we are islanded and disconnected from the bulk distribution grid and transmission system. And so when we island, the way that things operate is that our scheduling coordinator puts in an outage card to the California ISO and tells them we cannot respond to dispatch instructions with this generator. The ISO then sends us a 0 megawatt dispatch instruction. However, we're not at zero energy dispatch. The energy is being dispatched to match the load on the islanded microgrid and support the microgrid. And so that's okay with the CAISO. And our CEA, the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, will be compensated for the power that's generated and served to those customers on the islanded microgrid as though they are a price taker in the CAISO market. And so really there's no need for additional tariffs for compensation. We're essentially using the tariffs that exist for grid connected operation in island mode as well. Now, I will note that there could be a resilience fee to the customers. The customers on that circuit are just paying their regular, fees under their regular tariff. There is no resilience fee to those customers. Our CEA, who has funded half this project, could have chose to add a resilience fee to their customers, but that's not part of this project. And really, I think the justification for that, and I'll talk about this more in just a moment, is the resilience to these facilities, the airport and the Coast Guard station, serve the broad region in terms of emergency response. And so it's not like one customer is getting an advantage. The entire community gets the advantage from this resilience. So why was the RCAM project installed? And we're one of, Jeremy talked about, you need a customer to sort of raise their hand and say, hey, we want resilience for our community. Well, this is something that we did, and we've worked with PG&E to figure out a way to do this and to create a pathway for other customers to do it in the future. So the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, as our local community choice aggregator, they have goals to develop local renewable energy projects. And this is common with community choice aggregators throughout the state of California. They want to, and they're required to provide energy to their customers. It needs to come from somewhere. They can procure it from elsewhere, or they can be a part of building local projects. They also need to meet resource adequacy requirements. They want to and need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, hence the renewable piece of it. Building them locally means creating local jobs, and very important, providing resilience. You can see the red dot there, says RCAM for Redwood Coast Airport Microgrid. This map here is of the northwestern corner of California. So that red dot is about 100 miles south of the Oregon border, obviously right there on the Pacific coast. And just below the red dot, I don't know that you can see it well, but is Humboldt Bay and the town of Eureka. That's the county seat for Humboldt County. Humboldt County is a really quite remote and isolated area of California, and quite at risk for a number of reasons, and partly due to the remoteness and isolation. We have limited highway access serving our area, and it's not uncommon for the highways to be shut down on an annual basis due to storms or other natural disasters. We have limited and at-risk transmission serving our area, both natural gas and electric transmission. And the map there shows those blue lines is the transmission system. You can see a lot of lines more densely sort of laid out in the center. That's the Central Valley of California running north and south. That's the main backbone of the electrical grid that serves the state. And then you can see two lines going to the west to Humboldt Bay. Those are 215 kV lines, transmission lines, that tie Humboldt County to the main electric grid in California. And those lines have gone down due to PSPS. They can go down due to storm outages. And so, we're at risk here. And we're also very much susceptible to earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, and now more and more fires. And I know that this is something I'm sure we share with you all in Hawaii. So the airport and Coast Guard station that are located that are being served by this microgrid are critical lifelines for our community. If there's a major disaster on the North Coast and we lose, we become isolated, we lose the ability to move things in and out of the county, the air station and airport are the way for us to get supplies and services into our county and to distribute them throughout the county. And this happened in the Christmas flood of 1964, really wiped the whole county and the whole North State and up into Oregon really out for weeks. And that was the way they got services in, and that's the way they distributed supplies and services and emergency services around the county. So it's a very important asset to the county. That leads right into this slide, which is about the business model for the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid. And one of our project partners, TRC Companies, has worked on a business model analysis. And the short answer is the blue sky revenues, we're in blue sky operation 99+% of the time. Islanded operation is very rare, and that's the way we would like it to be. When we need it, we're glad it's there. It's like an insurance policy. But that 99+% of the time, we're generating a lot of revenue and a lot of benefits by generating renewable power, providing resource adequacy and so forth. But those revenues are expected to cover about half of the cost of the project. The rest of it is really the value of resilience. And I just explained kind of why that is so valuable to this community. So I think for successful projects like this, you do need a good source of blue sky revenue. You also need a demonstrated value of resilience for critical facilities. And I would just add, and I think Roseanne kind of talked about this a bit. It's the value, determining the value of resilience is not a real straightforward thing. It's somewhat complicated and something that people are really trying to assess. Finally, I just want to talk about a couple of key lessons from this front-of-the-meter multi-customer microgrid project. And the first thing I'll say is these projects are not easy. They are really complicated. And I think we're the first one in PG&E service territory, and the first one for PG&E, and the first one for our community. So it's been extremely challenging, and we've sort of are paving the way and creating tariffs and programs and processes that should make it easier for other projects, but it's still not going to be super easy, at least not for quite some time, I would say. It requires a really strong commitment and partnership from both the distribution system operator and the community. They need to want to work together. They need to come together in a real cooperative, with cooperation in mind and working together and finding solutions to problems and agreement to how to get things done. The community needs strong technical expertise. They need a willingness to take on risk. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment. And they need funding. The distribution system operator needs that same commitment to collaborate. They also need funding to support their efforts, and they need buy-in across business units. And I'll say a little bit more about this in just a moment. And then I also want to point out that the distribution system operator in this relationship of a community wanting to have a multi-customer front-of-the-meter microgrid on their system, the DSO is really in a position that if they want to be, they can be obstructionist. PG&E has not been in any way, shape, or form. They've been a tremendous partner, and we truly enjoy working with them. So, and that's a big plus because it's a challenge to get this stuff done. But that's a choice that they've made, is to be a partner in this. With regard to socialization of the project, so when we started this out, and I said, the conceptualization of this project occurred before there was even a grant funding available, and we partnered with PG&E in conceptualizing the project and the Redwood Coast Energy Authority. So they've been involved since the get-go and have been firmly committed. But we've been working with their grid innovations team, with Jeremy and with others on the technical side, the engineers. The grid innovations team is looking forward to the grid of the future, and they're looking, what are things need to change? What do we need to do to meet the needs of the future? However, we're trying to implement a project today, and it needs to operate, and the grid operators who keep the lights on day in and day out need to be on board and need to be socialized and trained and everything else. And that is it's been a challenge, and that's not to berate those people by any means. If I think about being a grid operator, the last thing that I want is risk. I'm risk averse. I just want to keep the darn lights on. And this is a new thing. It's new technology. It hasn't been done before, for the most part, these front of the meter systems. And so it's been a challenge to socialize the project, but we're getting it done. And we were just doing actually commissioning of islanded operation earlier this week. And then the last thing I'll say is the risk to the community, and in this case to the Redwood Coast Energy Authority and the owner and operator of those distributed energy resources, and the one that is valuing, getting the value of the resilience. The system, the RCAM system that we've designed, the microgrid system we've designed, has been approved to operate in islanded mode for the existing conditions on the microgrid circuit. And if load or DERs are added to that circuit, and PG&E's been very clear and upfront that if there's a new customer or a customer wants to add load to that circuit, PG&E can't say, no, you can't add load to the circuit. They're going to add load, and if there needs to be upgrades, there will be upgrades. But if there needs to be upgrades to support the islanded operation of this microgrid because of added load or added DERs, those costs can fall to the DER owner and operator. And if they're not willing or not able to handle those additional costs to make it safe to island the microgrid in this new, with these new loads or new DERs, they may lose approval to operate in island mode. They should still be able to operate in grid connected mode, but if they can't operate in island mode, they lose that resilience, and that's a big, that's half the value, is what I'm saying, in terms of the revenues in blue sky mode. So that's a risk that we've chosen to take, but it is a significant risk. I think that's what I had for you today. So thanks so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer questions. And I will stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Really appreciate it. For those who aren't familiar with these speakers, they do in fact all know each other. And I think their presentations and their collaboration together tell a really important holistic story of the number of organizations that need to come together to make microgrids a reality. So I'm going to start us off with a couple of questions. I'll conclude with a few observations, but in the middle, if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. So I'm going to go by speaker a bit here. Rosanna, I was wondering if you could share a little bit. You mentioned your work on the scorecard, Resilience Scorecard, and I was wanting to hear from you a bit about what data sources you were using for that scorecard, and were those data sources readily available? Did they or are they taking time to compile and run analytics? And if so, who's supporting that?
So the Resiliency Scorecard is a hypothetical suggested idea of how to characterize the attributes of a mitigation measure. And so that these mitigation measures can be compared in how well they meet both resilience goals like duration or notification, or availability of fuel supply, but also our state policy goals like GHG. And then it's possible that it could be, depending upon how it's used, blue sky characteristics or abilities could be taken into account in that scorecard. So there's not right now, there's not necessarily data being put into that. I mean, I can speak to how GHG emissions are in California. They are certified and monitored by both by California Air Resources Board, CARB, and then criteria pollutants are more certified by the local area resources board. So those would be potentially figures that would go into such an attribute measurement. The data that we're looking at would be, in terms of metrics, are more associated with things like the social burden metric, which is a novel metric that we're looking at, would be available through a tool developed by Sandia National Labs that looks at how much time and money, taking into consideration the ability of people to have that time and money, how much time and money does it take to get their needs met in the event of a power outage? This allows us to understand what resources are, it embeds in that metric, in that formula, it embeds the potential historical inequities that have occurred. It embeds in that metric affordability from the perspective of wealth disparity. How if someone has a lot more money, they would probably have the ability to put in their own resilience resources. Other metrics that we're looking at are more economic, whole picture, more top-down economic metrics, such as the interruption cost estimator, which has been used nationwide by utilities to identify costs of load lost, as well as a newer tool that the national labs are developing, which would be more reflective of long duration outage economic costs. So those are the kinds of metrics that we're looking at. And when we talk about geographical dispersion, or when we're talking about looking at an area, I liked Jim's map had the dotted line of what area the microgrid serves. Within that, you can identify where the critical facilities are. What it doesn't show is where the people are coming from, or where that critical service delivers that service to. And that is a potential larger geographical area. So we have to take into consideration those kinds of implications as well. And I can talk for a long time on this, so that's just kind of a smattering of the kinds of metrics that we're thinking about.
That's great, thank you. That's really helpful. Jeremy, a couple questions for you, particularly about the Community Microgrid Enablement Program. How did you think about staffing that team in terms of anticipating how many communities would be coming to you, wanting to get engaged, the extent of their needs? How did you sort of build that up?
Good question. Because this was brand new, we honestly didn't know. We did not know. So we requested funding authority sufficient to handle a higher end number of requests. However, what we did is we kind of leaned into it slowly. And so we hired what we needed to be able to handle the first request that came through the door, and figured we would ramp up as we went. And so if another utility or area were to do the same, I'd say start with a couple of experts, poach from within your company, people who already know your processes well, because that's essential. And just kind of put maybe one person in each position that you think you need, and then be nimble and prepared to add more as necessary.
Thanks. What are you seeing in terms of, how many communities have been coming to you, and what are the common, do they have any commonality in terms of the needs that they're wanting to fulfill?
So we have, I don't know the exact number today, but last I heard it was roughly 3 dozen different projects that we're tracking, each one being a different community. The program officially opened in, I think it was roughly the April-ish timeframe. So that's over the last 8 months or so. And they're at various stages of development. They're really kind of, there's all types that come to us. Wildfire resilience is one of the biggest ones, but we're also seeing communities that are interested in resilience for all the other potential reasons, all the issues that Jim mentioned. And then we also see some other customers who are coming to us, and they maybe are more focused on innovation and just really saying, you know what, we want to try and help figure out how all of this works. Deep-pocketed customers who, they're not actually in the cost offset portion of the program, but they're interested in the technical support and the partnership and the tariff, and they're really trying to shape the space and figure out a replicable model.
So I think last question there, Jeremy, you highlighted something I wanted to follow up on is how are you dealing with equity issues in the program? Are you seeing that the majority of the communities coming to you are fairly well off and resourced? What's been your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple of different angles. With respect to just allowing customers to achieve their energy goals on their own dime, the utility should be there for that always for our customers. And so that's why we offer the utility enhanced tools and information, technical support, and tariff to all customers. In fact, recently we filed with the CPUC and they approved generalizing our tariff to make it available to all customers who meet the basic eligibility criteria, 2 or more customers of our distribution system. When it comes to actually allocating scarce resources, for example, the cost offsets, or if we were so overwhelmed that our enhanced technical support couldn't actually get to all of the customers, we prioritize disadvantaged communities. It's actually written directly into our program. I believe it's 1/3 of all of our cost offsets are reserved solely for disadvantaged communities. And that's consistent with how we think about resiliency overall. That's that prioritization that needs to happen, and we can do it within our program and within our utility investments. It's essential to promote social equity.
Thank you. Jim, just kind of curious, were there any existing DR grid services agreements or any sort of customer level generation in the scope of the RCAM project that you had to coordinate with?
There were not, and as I mentioned, I think in my presentation, so we added a NEM PV system, which does add some. It adds some interest in from a sort of a technical and a research standpoint, and we did that. I mean, that NEM system, we really just carved off a piece of that large array. Each of those. That piece of the array is connected directly to inverters, which are connected directly to the grid through the interconnection equipment and transformer, et cetera. But and that was done because the airport property belongs to the county of Humboldt, And the Redwood Coast Energy Authority is a joint powers authority, but they're a separate entity from the County of Humboldt. So the land that we're using, the 7 acres or so for the PV array, plus I think in total it's maybe 11 acres or something like that that we have fenced in now for the project. And the airport needed to be compensated. In fact, they're FAA regulated. The FAA would not give approval for the use of that land for a non-aeronautical use unless they're compensated, and compensated at a fair market value. And we decided early on that rather than RCEA paying them on a monthly basis, let's say, that we would just carve out a chunk of the array and set up an aggregate net metering account, and that offsets bills at the airport for the county. We estimate it'll be probably $50,000 or $60,000 a year, and we were kind of lucky actually that we ended up sort of nailing the fair market value. That the FAA kind of reviewed that and came back and said, and I think someone did an appraisal, but anyway, they came back and said, actually, this is, you guys are right on. And we said, oh, that's good. That was kind of by chance. But so yeah, that is a behind the meter system that's included, but we didn't have to take into account any existing DERs on that circuit.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So I think quickly, just a couple of observations from me from what I heard from our panelists. I think the first message underscores some of what Katie shared earlier today in the best practices presentation, which is the need to think of resiliency more broadly, to define the problem or set of problems that an area is facing around resiliency, identify your solution set or combination of solution sets, and understand how the different technologies or other approaches fit together, complement one another, and ensure that those resiliency needs are indeed met. I think another is really the importance of collaboration between many parties. We've got CPUC, PG&E, and Schatz Energy Center here, but Jim also has now mentioned having to deal with a lot of the local individual customers, the California Energy Commission, which helped fund the project, coordination with the CAISO. That's a big piece of these microgrid projects. And in addition to just needing good working relationships, I think you need staff to do this. This can't be, a bunch of people's kind of half part-time jobs. You really need folks who have the bandwidth to be dedicated to make this project happen. And they also need to have some alignment that this is a priority. If the customer really thinks this is important, but this is really down on the list of what the utility has already prioritized in terms of its resiliency investments, there's going to be a mismatch. And so we really need to think of that as we move forward. I think another piece, the PG&E program, as well as Jim's presentation mentioned, and Roseanne, is the importance of thinking of how critical facilities and other community services can be made part of a microgrid, because when you do that, it becomes a lot more than just what are the individual customer sites that are energized, but how are they providing services for the broader community. And I think get to some of the importance of magnitude when Roseanne was speaking, that in a really large event, you need to have these customers online. I think last is just that at the outset, I think especially, as you kind of delve into this new world, each project is going to be unique and require a lot of hands-on attention. And these projects are complicated. And while it's important to include community services and critical facilities and not just residential customers, if you can, it makes things a lot more complicated. And it's going to take time. So setting ourselves up for a longer term framework that allows for more manual processes will be important, but to have the patience and the steps built in to allow for some of that more hands-on work at the outset will be valuable. So just want to quickly see any other observations from our commissioners or others before we move on.
I just maybe have one question or point. This is for Jeremy's presentation. Can you maybe speak a bit about how important the whole array of complementary activities are in support of the tariff? You got a slide talking about, all the different initiatives going on with PGE, and that, the tariff itself fits within that framework. And can you just kind of highlight, summarize how you see them supporting each other?
Yeah, gladly. So I think of it from really a planning perspective. I think that's the ideal approach, is to scan across the system, identify where the highest needs are, and then deploy solutions. So we find that large-scale resiliency often has the most cost-effective. Is often the most cost-effective. There are things that can be done at the grid scale that don't necessarily require something like a microgrid. We can do transmission switching and back ties and solutions like that will create additional resiliency and reliability in areas without needing to make significant generation investments. And then even then, once you get down into the microgrid pathway, or there's also like undergrounding, et cetera, I should note. Once you get down into the microgrid pathway, then you need to start thinking about, okay, at what scale should this microgrid occur? Jim's probably going to kill me for this one. But the RCAM project has been invaluable to PG&E. We've learned so much, developed the tariffs, developed the relationships, developed a program off of it. It's delivered a lot. However, when the RCAM project was put forward, it was for the use cases that Jim mentioned. PSPS actually was not. Our public safety power shutoffs were not a thing. As soon as we saw a larger resilience need in the area, with the area getting shut off for PSPS too frequently, we realized that we had a generating station in the area that serves all of the Humboldt area. And we were able to deploy upgrades at the Humboldt Way generating station that serves all of the Humboldt area, and that can now island. The entire area can now island and be a microgrid. So the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid is actually now a microgrid inside a microgrid inside our larger macro grid. And so we were able to island tens of, I don't know how many people are in the area, Jim will correct me, but I suspect it's tens of thousands of customers. And it's probably a similar, if not cheaper price, than making an upgrade with a local solution. So to me, by having that central planning, you can look across and figure out what's the most cost-effective solution. And then the tariff is one option that we have out there available for customers who want to self-provide, and I think that's very important. And then where there's utility funding behind it, we do our best to try and say, okay, the funding is tied to criteria that are roughly consistent with our planning.
All right, and just two really quick. You talked about I thought I heard 36 other projects in the works. Can you give us some range of, how nascent that is or how far along? And then just a quick question for Jim after that. Maybe I've missed it before, but how long did your project take from concept to getting online? That's it for me.
So 36 projects, and I want to be very clear about something. That will not result in 36 community microgrids. It will likely not result in double-digit community microgrids. It's a big lift. Jim will talk a little bit about that. I won't steal his thunder. But we are able to interact with the communities, figure out which ones are viable, sometimes give them other options, and sometimes, just explain to them why it doesn't make sense. And knowing that something isn't possible in some ways is can put one's mind at rest, as I'm sure we know, even in their own personal lives. So they're all early stage. Jim won't say how long, but because the program has only been open 8 months, they're not too far along. Some of them are in the technical assessment phase right now. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. So I'm glad you were talking, Jeremy, because I had to open a document real quick and see when did we really start. It's been that long. I forget how long ago it was that we started. So we got our letter of, this is funding, grant award funding from the California Energy Commission, August 8th of 2018. So we're now in 2022. So that's 3+ years ago. We started commercial operation in the CAISO market just before Christmas of last year. So, you know, a month ago, not even quite, well, yeah, basically a month ago. We're not participating in ancillary services yet, and we're still working out some issues and some things. We're the first hybrid resource, or we will be the first hybrid resource, I think, in CAISO's system. Microgrids is also new in CAISO's system, so those have been some, you know, so we're learning and learning right along with CAISO and PG&E and so forth. So that's we're just operational commercially. And then the islanded operation, as I said, we started our commissioning on site. We did a bunch of testing at PG&E's ATS Advanced Technology Services Lab in San Ramon. They had a grid simulator set up that simulated the distribution circuit, and we had there was hardware in the loop and software in the loop, sort of a mirror image of our actual project. We did a lot of testing there, where there's a little bit more still to finish up there, but we started doing the testing on site, and we just started islanding testing earlier this week. Had some successes, also found some bugs, and are working to fix a few things. So we're not actually, we don't have final approval for islanded operation yet. We expect to have that probably in a few weeks or within a month or so. And, you know, I guess, I mean, it's been a long haul, but, you know, I would hope that once you have a program set up and you know, some tariffs in place, it's not going to take that long for every project after us. We also chose to do this at an airport. We had no idea what we were getting involved in. The FAA is a formidable regulatory force to deal with, so that was a big deal. RCEA took out a loan from the USDA. That's taken years. I mean, they've been, I think they mostly deal with farmers. Things don't happen very quickly with the USDA. So there, and then, you know, then the development of the tariffs and everything has you know, and then amidst all this, you know, we've had PG&E's had things like the fires to deal with, and so that kind of, you know, diverts some of their attention for good reason. And then we decided to do this in the middle of a global pandemic, which hasn't sped things up either. So it's been a long haul. We're really close to the finish line, and yeah, but it has been a challenge.
Thanks so much. Any further questions?
I was just going to add one other very quick comment, which I think kind of related to so this project I think one of the things we saw with the business model is, I mentioned this, that in California, community choice aggregators are looking to develop local renewable energy projects, primarily solar, but not just solar. And in California now, there's so much renewables on the grid and so much solar that prices can go negative in the middle of the day. So, you know, they're changing the structure of time of use and everything else to try to adjust for that. But the fact of the matter is, when you put solar in California now, you pretty much need to put batteries in, because you need to be able to shift things, you know, based on what the grid needs. If you're going to put solar and battery projects in your community, if you can locate them close to critical facilities, then you might start to say, okay, we were going to do batteries and renewables anyway, but let's locate them close to critical facilities. Now we have some additional added cost to be able to island, but if the batteries and PV are going to be there anyway, you can add that piece to get the resilience. And so that's kind of, you know, that's one possible approach.
Jeremy, I see you put your hand up.
Yeah, if I may, I'd like to tack on to that. I agree with Jim completely. I joke that our CMET program is free islanding with your purchase of generation, right? Because we provide the distribution upgrades for free. What I later came to realize is that in RCAM actually it doesn't quite suffer the same way as some of the other resources do. DERs are placed that are there for market participation and for revenue are placed in areas where they can get deliverability, where they can earn resource adequacy within the California market. So they're placed where they make the most financial sense. With resilience doesn't care about the financial sense of a resource. Resilience needs are where they are. And so sometimes you have a situation where your DERs are just less economic because of where they're sited within the system. So that's one challenge that comes up with that. That said, I wholeheartedly agree with what Jim said. If you're going to build it, make it a resilience resource and create those partnerships between the utility and those that are actually out there building the generation.
Thanks, Jeremy. All right, any further questions? All right, just a big thank you again to our speakers. Really appreciate your time and expertise, as well as I'm sure it took a bit of effort to put together these presentations, so thank you. I'm sure this won't be the last time we're all speaking together, and appreciate the shout outs to the great work that Hawaii has done in this space, and I hope we can continue to collaborate and learn from each other and share best practices.
Jeremy told me next time we do this that we want to come to Hawaii to do it. So
Okay.
I'm on board for that.
All right, we'll make it happen. Not a tough place to get people to visit. All right, wonderful. Well, I will turn it over to staff for the next portion of our agenda.
So actually, the next portion of our agenda is a break. So let's take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene for party presentations, responses to staff's initial priority list. Let's come back at 1:14. I'm sorry. Yeah, 1:14. Thank you. All right, everyone. It is 1:24. Thank you, Gina, for the correction of my time telling. And we are going to get started shortly as we're all sort of coming back to our computers. Thank you, Claire, for leading that panel and for the thoughtful questions that you asked. I feel like we all learned a lot about just how much really is involved in microgrid development. So we're going to shift to presentations from the parties and responses to staff's initial list of priority topics for phase 2. And I think we're going to start with the Hawaiian Electric Company. So I'm not sure who is presenting on HECO's behalf.
Hi, Katie. This is Mark Wong with Hawaiian Electric. I'll be presenting.
Great. Thanks,
Okay.
Mark.
Let me, well, I have as much luck as the other presenters getting my screen to share. Okay. If it's
Looks
it's
good.
coming up still. Okay. Great. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Mark Wong. I work for the Hawaiian Electric Company. I'm the manager of our Community and Commercial Programs area in our Customer Service, Customer Energy Resources Division. Here with me also is Ken Aramaki, who's the director of our Transmission and Distribution and Interconnection Planning team. And we also have several other supporting team members and directors from our company on the call as well. And we've also included Paul DiMartini with Newport Consulting. As you may be familiar with Paul, he was involved heavily with our phase 1 Microgrid Services Tariff. First, I'd like to thank the commissioners and commission staff for the opportunity to present at this technical conference. We're very happy with the format of this and think it's a great start for phase 2. So just moving on to the next slide. Hawaiian Electric appreciates the Commission's proposed priority list topics and largely believes these are consistent with the company's recommended priority topics filed on October 21st last year. I just wanted to point out one thing that we wanted to clarify for folks who may not be familiar with the Microgrid Services Tariff. But in regards to the second priority list item, where we have standby charges, exit fees, and other charges, just to clarify that our interpretation of utility compensation is really about equity considerations for non-participants. The companies believe that standby charges and exit fees are to protect non-microgrid participants rather than the utility earning a profit. So we want to make sure that this is seen as a customer protection issue and that we're not just protecting customers within a microgrid. Just to level set, the Commission asked Hawaiian Electric to update everyone on the activity after the Microgrid Services Tariff was submitted last year on May 27, including the number of applications received and the experiences in implementing the tariff, as well as updating the Oahu microgrid map being developed, which Ken will cover. Since approval of a Microgrid Services Phase 1 tariff, or Rule 30, the companies took ownership of the tariff in my area, which now owns the operationalization of Phase 1 and will be leading implementation operationalization of Phase 2. In addition to the other programs that we manage in my area, including CBRE or shared solar, and also administering the standard interconnection agreements. Since the tariff was released in May last year, we've been actively working on aligning processes to make sure that we're able to receive applications. Part of that is enabling our tool, the customer interconnection tool, to be able to track these projects in an automated fashion. Those are being tracked manually until development will be completed by the third quarter of this year. We've also lined up processes so that we can receive customer inquiries, be able to answer questions, and get the right information to the folks who are interested. We also engaged in a series of working group sessions with many areas in our company More particularly, I wanted to mention our engagement with our customer service teams and key account areas so we can help drive customer awareness of the program and try to get awareness of those who might be interested in participating in the program. We also did external outreach, starting with a press release, and we also set up a Microgrid Services Tariff website specific to this program, with myself as being the main point of contact. We're continuing to work towards getting more applications and getting more interest in the program. And we have several next steps, including a focus on equity, vulnerable and underserved communities, and critical infrastructure, because we want to make sure that the program is fair and that those who need the resiliency the most get it. And part of that is increasing customer awareness and education on resiliency. So what is resiliency? Tying it into broader company programs, even energy efficiency, so there's less energy to cover. And microgrids as being one of the many options for customers. And going out into the community and figuring out what their needs are and solving their needs. And I think we heard a little bit from the past speakers about similar efforts in other jurisdictions. And so similarly, we agree that we need to work in concert with existing resiliency programs and existing outreach efforts, such as the integrated grid planning efforts. In terms of the applications received, we have actually not received any formal applications for either a hybrid microgrid or customer microgrid since the tariff went live on May 27th. Hybrid microgrids, we did get a few inquiries. I mentioned University of Hawaii was had asked us about microgrids through broader discussions. And also wanted to point out that nationwide, we haven't seen too many hybrid microgrids. I know we talked about one here today, and we're only aware of maybe 2 or 3 hybrid microgrids. In terms of customer microgrids, we again have not received any formal applications, but we have identified 2,925 applications for PV plus battery applications received since May 27. And we wanted to point out that customer microgrids could be considered with existing programs with PV and battery, because Tariff Rule 30 clarifies that these projects in this configuration provides resilience. But as long as these projects use the latest inverters with firmware to allow islanding and provide backup power. And during the backup mode, these systems don't run in parallel with the grid, so it is compliant with anti-islanding provisions in Rule 14H. So we feel comfortable mentioning this number here. With that, I was going to cover, before we could move over to Ken's slide. In addition to some of the next steps mentioned on the previous slide, we are working on encouraging adoption of the Microgrid Services Tariff. And we agree that strategically choosing communities to put these microgrids is going to be key to success of the program. With that, I'd like to turn over to Ken to cover our Etip project update. Ken?
Thanks, Mark. Thanks everyone for having us. The Etip project, so this happened around, we applied for this technical assistance in February 2021, which is around the time that we're trying to finalize the Rule 30, the final tariff. When we it was kind of serendipitous, I guess, that this opportunity came out where we're trying to figure out how do we get this kind of complex concept out and bring awareness to it to customers and developers. And our concept was that we could try to create a map that kind of takes into account multiple characteristics of what would be prime or opportunity location to site hybrid microgrids. So we applied for this assistance in February. In April, we were selected as one of the 11 projects nationwide. And then in May, we started our kickoff. And with this project, we were able to work with NREL SNL and HNEI to create this map. And we basically get to leverage these really smart folks in the labs. Between May and September of last year, we were working on scoping, and where we arrived at was developing a static map of Oahu and trying to figure out or developing criteria or rules so that we could apply that to other islands as well. And between September and January, we just kind of finished our data gathering, and I have all the kind of things that we gathered on the right. So with all that data, now NREL, the national labs, particularly NREL, they're going to start to map or find intersections between these types of characteristics, and then see how we can apply different types of criteria to align all these different characteristics. The next steps in July, we hope to have a draft map, and this project is an 18-month project, so it takes us out to the end of December, which will have the final map and report from the national labs. And within that time frame, there is a tentative plan to go to the community to get some input as well into the final map. So some of the characteristics that we're looking at, circuit configurations, available hosting capacity, the existing DERs that are in the areas, as well as critical facilities or critical circuits, what the impact of flooding will be in these areas, what the reliability of some of these areas are, and then also aligning that with disadvantaged communities. So yep, that's it for this slide. So thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Ken. With that concludes Hawaiian Electric's portion of the presentations. I'd like to turn over back to Kate.
Thanks, Mark and Ken. Why don't we move to the consumer advocates presentation, and then we can ask questions all together. Marcy, are you presenting for the consumer advocate?
Oh, yes, I am, Katie. Thank you. Let's see if I can share my screen, continue the success in that. Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank the commission, commission staff and GridWorks for convening and organizing this conference. And I kind of wanted to know, a lot of our slides were kind of based on our October filing on the priority list, but after listening to several of the presentations this morning, I kind of want to put it in the context of the presentations this morning. So this slide, I kind of wanted to note, I wanted to thank the commission staff for, I guess we noted that several of the priority issues kind of were in line with what we kind of recommended in October. So we kind of, on this slide, I kind of wanted to note about what some of the speakers talked about this morning was kind of identifying the critical facilities. I guess the need to do that, critical facilities, and identifying the customer needs for microgrids, which was part of Act 200. And I think, one of the steps that we can take, in this phase 2 is kind of building on phase 1 and some of the efforts done that are currently in process with even the IGP efforts for the resiliency group to kind of identify those needs and prioritize those needs as much as possible. And then in doing so, I think some of the efforts that we started looking at, but that we're putting on a parking lot list were the resiliency tariff rate or rider that can be compensation for resiliency grid services that we believe is a priority issue to continue in phase 2. I think this will have to be coordinated, especially with identifying the types, I guess that the types of microgrids can vary depending on the type of customers or critical facilities that are being served. So recognizing that the type of compensation may vary. And then harmonizing with other programs and grid services mechanisms. I kind of wanted to note on this slide, for phase one, what we tried to recognize is that actually customer grid microgrids were already being developed even without the even before the microgrid services tariff. So those customer microgrids were interconnecting through the DER tariff that were already in place. And actually, because we didn't want to inadvertently affect the development or continued development of customer microgrids, we wanted to retain that existing process as we work through the microgrid services tariff, so that those customer microgrids could continue to develop. And one thing I kind of wanted to note here was that by doing that, we kind of retain the structure that the customer microgrids were going to be compensated through the DER programs. So I heard this morning about recognizing that revenues are important to these to their development. So I think that is one way, I think, through the DER docket number 2019-0323, that we can continue to look at that and keep in mind that we can holistically look at the, I guess, the rates that can, or the revenue, or the, compensation to both microgrid operators and DER customers, and do it holistically that way. For hybrid microgrids, because, and it seems like it's a little bit different in California, but that is one thing I kind of wanted to follow up on, was that for hybrid microgrids here, the company serves the customers in the non-island mode. So those customers, those individual customers can participate in DER, and they can also participate in grid services. So that one thing that we can look at is the resiliency fee, that if that's one way of compensation for these hybrid microgrids. And then for this last slide, looking at microgrids in non-emergency situations, I think we also are looking at it to make sure that standby charges and exit fees are considered, which is one of the topics that the commission staff also recognized, and that consumer protection issues are also looked at too. So Katie, that's all I have. I think I'm looking forward to the discussion. There was a lot of information this morning, so it'd be good to discuss. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. So we have a little bit of time set aside also. If there are any parties who want to comment on the priority list of phase 2 topics, you are welcome to do so now, or of course it can come up in the discussion as well, but just wanted to hold some space if there are other comments from stakeholders.
Hi, Katie, Sam with Ulupono. Just wanted to say that we're supportive of the priority issues that the commission came out with, but we are also interested in spending some time thinking through the funding mechanisms to support the development of microgrids, just noting how important of a part that is in the success of this program.
Thanks, Sam. Any other comments from stakeholders or questions on maybe what you've heard from either HECO or a consumer advocate? Okay, well, hearing none, we can.
I did have one question, just related to the hybrid microgrid map. I was just wondering how the critical facilities in disadvantaged communities were determined or defined for inclusion in the map. Was there a specific definition or?
Actually, we're still working through the details of the disadvantaged communities. It's more, we're looking at whether they're flagged for, whether certain clusters of customers are flagged for assistance. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of definitions for that could be used. So we are looking at the details for that. And then critical facilities, we leveraged the input from the IGP resilience working group.
The working report.
Yeah, the deliverable. Yeah, so we use some of that data.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. And actually, could you talk a little bit more about HECO's process for, it sounds like you're still identifying or working through defining disadvantaged areas. Could you talk a little bit about like what that process is and whether you're working with stakeholders on that or if that's an internal discussion with HECO? I'm just curious how these areas will be defined and identified.
Sure. Yeah, it is an internal process. We have some of that work already done for other programs. We've identified, like, I'm not the expert at this, but we have like LMI customer listings. So that data plus I think we also have some publicly available LIHEAP data. So I think merging those types of information into this disadvantaged community thing, that's where that's how we'll get it.
I have just a quick question. So I'm curious on what the long-term goals are for this study. What do you anticipate doing with the results and the map at the end of the study? Is this going to be incorporated in IGP or is it going to just be, how are you going to utilize it?
Sure. Good question. I think the near-term thinking is that we publish it somewhere on our website, and then as we do community outreach or engage with customers, that's one resource to provide customers. Because really, like all the other presentations, a microgrid, especially a hybrid microgrid, that's one solution of potentially many. And so this is just going to look at, is this a potential solution for this area? And that's maybe something that customers and developers could have in their hands to look further into, or for us as well.
I have a question for HECO. In IGP, in one of your Resilience Stakeholder Council meetings, you introduced a bow tie concept regarding distinguishing between preventative versus mitigative solutions for resiliency. And my question is, how are you determining, what portion of your resiliency solutions come from preventative measures like grid hardening versus mitigative measures like microgrids?
Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that. We don't have the right person on this call, but we can follow up with you, Gina, if you'd like.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. Well, let's shift then into some discussion on, either reflections of what you heard today from the panel or best practices presentation. reactions or responses to any of that content, and then how that's shift or influencing your thinking about priority docket topics, or not. So Marcy, if you don't mind if I call on you first, I think you mentioned you have some questions about what came up a little earlier today.
Yeah, I think I guess a couple things that I heard that were kind of critical was kind of prioritizing and identifying the critical facilities or critical needs of the community to I guess find out where microgrids would benefit the most. And I think after that along with that, identifying, the options that you can to serve those critical facilities and critical customer needs was another thing I heard. And then I guess compensation was an important thought in or consideration in there, especially for I guess the developer or the customers that are wanting the microgrid. I think those were the things that I think should be prioritized based on what was discussed this morning.
This is Paul DeMartini. Marcy, you had asked a question about potentially a difference between how California, what you heard Jim talk about in terms of the way it works in terms of revenues around tariffs, islanded versus blue sky. Actually, on the retail side, even though there's a separate energy supplier, the community choice aggregator in California, in many cases, but not all cases, the utility sometimes provides that energy as well as part of a bundled bill. In both cases, the customer is still billed by that energy supplier as if they were not islanded. So there's no difference between island mode and blue sky mode for the retail rate, just like there isn't for the wholesale. It's still considered the same. So that's similar to how the tariff structure is in Hawaii.
Oh, for the hybrid, Paul.
Yeah, for the
I
hybrid.
guess I was wondering too, for that system, it seemed like what Jim said and Jeremy, I think that DER resources were put in places where would benefit the microgrid. And I guess I was wondering, I guess how did they do that? I guess was that all part of the building of the microgrid?
He was suggesting that if they were, then you could more incrementally add the capability to island. So if you were, for example, and I'm talking about hybrid, if you worked collaboratively, say between a developer of a community solar and storage project with the community that project would be sited in and the utility, there may be a way to think about where that connection is in relation to, say, critical facilities, such that you could create an islanding point. So you'd have to connect the dots between the community, obviously whoever is managing that critical facility, because some of that's the governmental or not, and then the developer and the utility planning staff. So it's conceivable that could be done, and obviously to the extent that you can get a couple of objectives done at the same time, that's ideal. But that's what he was referring to. If that happened, then yeah, you might be able to then just incrementally have lower costs, because the DER and the solar and storage was going to be built anyway. So and that economic value proposition would have already been essentially rationalized or determined. So the incremental bit would have just been the grid connection for the islanding.
Okay. And Paul, can I just confirm then under island mode, who's operating the microgrid?
So, and by the way, I should clarify that, or just explain that I supported PG&E in the development of their community microgrid enablement program and tariff, as well as the more recent microgrid incentive program. So the way it works in PG&E's case is, and this is different than the other utilities in California, but PG&E has what they call a split controller. So they have two microgrid controllers that operate in parallel. So the one that Jeremy's describing as is the one that they're using, or Jim actually described this, but the one that the utility uses controls the recloser switch, the islanding switch, and it sends a signal to the controller that the DER asset owner is using to basically supply the energy for that microgrid. So they have two controllers that are basically mirrored and sending signals between each other through a fiber optic connection. It's a more complex arrangement, but allows, in their case, to have a separate owner sort of operate their resources than necessarily having the utility operate that. But the utility still retains responsibility and control over the grid side, but not the assets. In the San Diego case in Borrego Springs, the utility controls both in the island mode.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Marcy. So, go ahead.
Sorry, that's also why it's taken them longer to work out the control scheme, because it's the first of its kind. So it's more complex arrangement. There was new technology, new controller had to be developed for that.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So what I heard from Marcy in terms of priority topics for phase 2 was that identification of critical facilities, identification of community needs, as well as identifying options that can serve those facilities and community needs are priority issues, as well as compensation and ongoing funding streams for those microgrids. Mark, if you don't mind if I call on you, has anything that's been shared today influenced your thinking on priority topics? I know you shared earlier that what staff has shared is aligned with priority topics that HECO had identified too, but anything else you want to emphasize?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Agreed. I think largely all of the parties here are in general agreement on the priority topics. I think from an operational standpoint, one thing we wanted to raise is just understanding what kind of barriers are in place with the developers and the customers. Because as I pointed out, we haven't seen too much activity on the tariff. So, what is that? We're going to try to focus on outreach, but, are there other reasons behind it? Is it, looking at the economics of it? Is it looking for opportunities? Is it just having the technical expertise to move forward? Those kind of things we'd like to look into, and then we could create action plans on how to address those.
Thanks, Mark. And is there anyone on the line today from the Microgrid Resources Council that might be able to speak to Mark's question? Or any other stakeholders who might speak to barriers that you're hearing or experiencing in terms of microgrid development?
Katie, this is Gina from the PUC. I just wanted to echo Mark's, sentiment that there should be some focus on customer outreach, just given the fact that we've seen from his presentation that there has been little to no applications filed in phase 1 of microgrid.
Great, thanks, Gina. And I've also heard, I think, a couple of times today that outreach may fall within sort of broader customer engagement that the utility is conducting, or more with a focus on sort of more holistic solutions for communities. It doesn't have to just be microgrid outreach, but appreciate that, and definitely agree that the community perspective is critical to project development.
Katie, this is Paul DeMartini again. a couple of insights, building on Mark's point that came out of the California working group around the Microgrid Incentive Program around sort of barriers for these more complex systems is that, so the outreach is part of it, but the other part is education. These are pretty complicated projects. So as you kind of heard Jim talk about, there's a number of different aspects that typically get involved because you're talking about more than one customer, typically critical facilities. There may be land use issues. There's a whole range of issues, not unlike a larger development that folks are familiar with that need to be involved. The engineering is a little complicated. So there's some education around that and the technical skills that may be required by the developer or the community to be able to have. So that's an area that has been discussed a fair amount in California as part of it. So I would say that those are really kind of key issues is the complexity and the engineering capabilities that are needed to support development of a project. And the other part is education on the front end after outreach is helping people kind of come up to speed as to what sort of skill sets they need to have as part of their team to be able to work through whether this makes sense for them.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so from HECO, we've heard the need to, in addition to the priority topics identified, a desire to better understand barriers to microgrid development, and then to collectively think about, how can we overcome those barriers. And Paul highlighted that in California, some of the barriers relate to outreach, but also education, not just customer education, but also education for developers and potentially, utilities and other involved stakeholders. I think what we heard pretty clearly from the panel today is that a lot of parties are involved in development of a microgrid project, and it is incredibly complex. And so everyone is sort of learning together as project development occurs. Okay, so Andrew, would you mind putting up again the phase 2 priority topics so we can just look at them as we're chatting as well? Because the next question that I have for the group is, if you were to prioritize these priority topics or consider, what time or resources would be necessary to address the topic, understanding that there may be some bandwidth constraints or resource constraints, is there anything that stakeholders want to emphasize as like priorities within the priorities? Okay, well, hearing none at the moment, you all are welcome to reach out to Andrew or myself or any other staff members if things come up that you find need to be addressed first.
I mean, Katie, I'll just jump in and add, I think, the way things are organized, at least from the way that I see it, and I think Ulupono sees it, is that the way that it's organized right now makes sense. I think in thinking about bandwidth and how to move forward, it might be helpful to think about what will take the longest to figure out. And seeing the third bullet point under microgrid compensation and grid services, I'm thinking that there hasn't really been much work to date here to determine the value of resilience or what that amount would look like, the considerations, the metrics, et cetera. And so noting the timeline for that, maybe we could focus on prioritizing that third bullet underneath microgrid compensation and grid services.
Great, thanks, Sam.
Katie, this Paul, if it's helpful for context on that third bullet, So the work that the California Commission mentioned that they're looking at and collaborating with Sandia and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. That effort is ongoing as part of a research project with the DOE. So that's still kind of in earlier stages of development. Also, the California Public Utility Commission, you may know this and can confirm it, but their track 5 agenda, which starts in 2023, is when they'll pick up this issue of value resilience. So for this year, there's kind of work behind the scenes that Roseanne's talking about, but the actual working group task on value resilience for them doesn't start to 2023. So while it is kind of a gating issue, it's not clear there's going to be a lot of information that's available to support your discussions in terms of techniques and methodologies that could be applied. As you heard, they're at the conceptual level at this point. So depending on what your objectives that you want to try and achieve, it'd be helpful to maybe examine where you think you can, where the state of the art is going to be when you want to have the conversation, so that you can think about what you might be able to achieve over the next couple of years. The other issues obviously can be addressed, more directly, I think, in the near term for sure.
Katie, I was kind of wondering, following up on the outreach, whether education would be important to, I guess, right now with customer microgrids, there is a compensation, element to it. But I'm curious, how we could help develop that more.
So do you mean sort of leveraging phase 2 to design those educational materials for to encourage like customer microgrid development?
Yeah. Just trying to think of, what Sam said about trying to look at the time frame to see what we can get going in the near term, and then work on other things that may take longer, recognizing that it might take longer, but to start the work, to do it, so we can get the ball rolling on some of it, and then trying to hit kind of what we can do in the near term.
Great, thanks, Marcy. So I also want to invite comments from Commission staff on whether anything that you've heard today, or anything that stakeholders have shared, has that influenced the way that you all are thinking about priority topics, or perhaps the way that you would recommend approaching those priority topics?
Katie, this is Gina again. Just to reiterate my previous point that perhaps, paying some attention to, again, the barriers to, the participation, and also, what would make the microgrid tariff more attractive for developers to enroll in and take part in.
Great, thanks, Gina.
Go
ahead.
Sorry, this is Jenny. Just one thing that really resonated with me was that there's EPIC funding that was available to help develop these microgrids, or even go into the, and so, I'm racking my brain to think of ways that we can develop, state funds or research and development funds that would help facilitate the development of these, in particular in pilot mode, where it's a demonstration project to determine how successful this can be at end of the line, remote areas or what have you, where we've identified, or where the study that's being conducted by HECO has identified areas that would be ripe for a microgrid development. Where can we find funds that will help that development, because I think it does need to be a public-private partnership. And even if the utility is just adding, and not just, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but if the utility is adding their expertise and their process and planning and flow throughout their organization, that's a huge financial contribution to the microgrid development. So outside of just like, the planning side of this and the component of this, we actually have the infrastructure itself and the planning and the community outreach and all of that needs to take place. So how is it that we can actually look at some financing opportunities that would enable us to get one of these off the ground sooner than later, and in order to prove the concept that how it works in Hawaii and how it's valuable and can bring value and these value streams that we talked about earlier on, so that was one thing that struck me, is that there's funding, and there has been funding in California to help support these initiatives, and Hawaii needs to get creative and think about how we can do that as well.
Thanks, Jenny. And if I could just follow up on that, I think I heard on the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum call this morning that Hawaii may be pursuing DOE grants for resilience more broadly. I'm not sure, how that might fit in, or if there might be opportunity there, what your perspectives on that would be.
Absolutely. I think that would be an excellent application for it. And so hopefully, we can do a good job at grant writing, to try and solicit those funds for that exact, application. So you're right. Absolutely.
Great.
And Jenny, on a side note, you mentioned pilots, and in the PBR docket, there's an innovation pilot framework work plan that the companies have recently filed, and they mentioned in that work plan that resiliency is one, topic that they would be interested in considering for pilots. So that could be one avenue for pursuing demos and pilots.
Great, thanks, Gina. And actually, if I could ask Mark, or maybe someone else from HECO is aware, I think that there is an application under development for a resilience pot. I'm wondering if someone could speak to, how that might fit in with microgrid development, or if you all have given some thought to the overlap here.
Sure, I can speak a little to it. I do know that the company, not my area, another area, is finalizing the application for a resilience program. This initial resilience program, to my knowledge, doesn't locate microgrids within it, but the investments that are being put forth are things that, basically, if you're going to have a successful microgrid, you need to have a resilient grid as well. So these are like the low-hanging fruit investments that are being put forth first. And I'm not sure what the target for the application is yet, but it should be soon.
Great, thanks, Ken. So it sounds like those investments will help to enable the grid to be sort of microgrid ready, as we've heard a little bit from PG&E on the need for infrastructure upgrades to accommodate microgrids. It sounds like some of these investments will relate to that. Okay, great. Anything else on the proposed priority topics, or anything that anyone wants to emphasize for staff as they move forward with finalizing this list of priority topics? Okay, hearing none, we can move on then into next steps. So staff's letter to stakeholders on phase 2 highlighted that I believe there will be a microgrid working group ongoing through phase 2 as well. that will be structured similarly to how the working group was structured for phase one, in that it's a stakeholder-run process. I think you all selected co-chairs for the working group process. I wonder if I could just ask Hiko or the consumer advocate what you're thinking on the structure of the working group will be moving forward.
Thanks, Katie. We did talk a little bit about that, and I think the structure in phase one was effective. So I think we envision a similar co-chair working group. Definitely be myself and someone from the consumer advocate to represent, and we can facilitate the meetings and discuss the priority list items. Tee up any members who want to participate in that forum.
And then how did you all identify or solicit interest from stakeholders on participating in that working group? Apologies, I'm not familiar with how it was done in phase one.
Maybe Ken can elaborate on that. Or Ken and Marcy might be able to elaborate on that. I know that a lot of the participants just were docket participants. Came that way.
Sorry, I missed the full question. Can you repeat that?
Oh, just curious how in phase one you all solicited participants for the working group, and whether that's the same process that you think you'll take for phase two.
Yeah, phase one had like kind of sub phases within it. When we first started, we had this really large working group, and it had the interveners, plus we invited many others to get more input, it was good. It was good to get that kind of foundational steps into what we should prioritize within the tariff, and then towards the end we had another set of working group meetings that were more focused, and those had a much smaller group, primarily the interveners that were actively involved in the proceeding, and that helped to kind of keep things moving forward.
Okay, so it sounds like the composition of the group sort of adapted over time depending on what your needs were.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, sorry, Marcy.
Oh no, I just wanted to add, I think when the priority list, I guess for phase two is finalized, I think like in phase one, we kind of broke up into subgroups, yeah, depending on the topics. So I think we could do that too. I think most, I guess, parties chose to be in each subgroup, but it kind of helps, I guess, focus the discussion, yeah, into that particular topic, I think.
Hi, Marcy, this is Anand. What I remember from phase one is that you had the two subgroups, right? You had the market facilitation and interconnection standards group. And then later you decided to combine it, right? I think to just make it easier. I'm not sure if you want to do that this round or not, but depending on once we finalize the priority list, you can make that decision. But yeah, I guess the census we wanted to see if you had an idea or you wanted to confirm any like co-chairs at this time, or maybe let us know later on, But we just wanted you guys to get started in terms of organizing the working group.
Oh, Anand, I guess I had a question then. I guess,
sure.
Did you want us to start, I guess, kind of scoping out, I guess, meeting, or I guess starting a schedule, I guess, or?
Well, I just mean that the foundations of organizing, the working group, because I know you still need the priority list, right? And so just to let you know, the commission will file an order, with the final priority list soon, and then a procedure schedule will be included with the order. Also, we have further instructions, to be included as needed as well. But in the meantime, we were hoping that the working group can get started just organizing itself. I remember last time in phase one, didn't you guys kind of have this one meeting just in terms of just organizing, right? Yourselves. So I thought maybe in the interim, maybe get that going and identify the co-chairs if possible. And then later on, after, I'm just going by the next steps. If you look at that slide there,
terms of the working group meetings, we also would like, you guys to meet as often as possible, and then just inform the commission staff, when your meetings are in the details, so we can participate as well. I know last time you sent an email invite to us, I think, for that. And then lastly, the quarterly status conference. We're thinking approximately every 3 months, the commission will hold a status conference for an update on the progress on the working group efforts. And then that time, I think what you guys would do is submit slides to us, like the day before, right? On the updates. Same process, basically. Yeah. And then again, I just wanted to reiterate that basically we're going to have more information following up in the order regarding details in terms of dates, and we have the procedure schedule as well too, and further instructions.
Thanks, Anand. I think we can take that action. We've already had some preliminary discussions when the original phase 2 order came out last year. So we can leverage that and continue discussions and get a little more crisp plan together so we can be ready when this next order comes through.
Yeah, no, that'd be good if you can hit that ground running as soon as the priority list is issued. Yeah. Thank you.
I just had a question. It's not process related. It's actually for Hiko. Is there any updates on the Nelha microgrid demonstration project? And any thoughts on how we could maybe leverage that microgrid project once it's underway for some learnings to inform this docket?
Yep, I know they're an important stakeholder and project was discussed in phase 1. We actually didn't get permission from them to share anything public, but maybe perhaps another forum we can get their feedback.
Sorry, where was that microgrid project? I think I heard NOHA.
Yep, it's the Nelha project on Hawaii Island. Microgrid proposal.
Okay, I think that's the one that an opening order just came out for that demonstration project. Is that right?
Yep, I believe so.
Oh, I'm seeing both nodding and head shaking.
Wait,
I think you're referring to the North Kohala microgrid. But this is different. The Nelha project is there's an area, and they go by Nelha. It's a pump cold ocean water into their labs.
It's a facility on the Big Island.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so we are ahead of schedule, which is very exciting on a Friday afternoon. I do want to leave a little space for staff. Was there anything else in terms of next steps that you wanted to highlight? Anand walk through some of the next steps in terms of like the working group. Anything else to highlight?
No, for me that's it. Yeah, mainly. And like I said earlier, there'll be more information coming forward. With the order. So in the order, in terms of the procedure schedule, we'll have the finalized priority list and further instructions as needed.
Great, thank you. So I'll invite some closing comments from Commissioner Potter.
Great, thank you. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. This has been really illuminating, and the questions that you all have posed have been wonderful. I am so excited about the second phase. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to think about leveraging funds from the Department of Energy and from the Federal Investment in Jobs Act. I think we have a real great use case here in Hawaii where we can be a model, as was discussed from California and other entities that have looked to us for our role and the actions that we've taken in order to establish our tariff that's currently in place today. And what we're looking to do is an enhance beyond that. So this is a really exciting time in our history, and I think in the history of the United States as we move forward and thinking about how microgrids can help us transition away from fossil fuels, decarbonize, and get us to the goals that our states have outlined for us, in particular in the Western United States. We really have, I always say that the future is distributed. Energy will become less centralized, and we will be looking at resources that are allocated across service territories that better serve load pockets where they're sited. And I think that transition will take time, but we're at the precipice of it. So we have an excellent opportunity right now to lay the groundwork and to do just that. And so I'm excited to work with you all, and I thank you so much for your commitment to continuing on this process and on this journey. It's been quite a few years, and we recognize that. And hopefully, I think the procedural schedule will outline, in a little bit more detail of the timeline in which we hope to get this done and accomplished. And I think that we're going to beat the CPUC and their resiliency work based on our timeline, our procedural schedule. So we have some tough work ahead of us, though. I mean, evaluating resiliency and thinking about how that plays into, how we value customer resources in front of the meter, behind the meter, and how they can provide critical services to the critical infrastructure that we have on all of our islands. This is going to be a big challenge, and I really appreciate the input from California that provided us with some of that scoping and sort of thinking about how the economic impacts from outages over time really do influence and impact disadvantaged communities. So we've received some great information. I think we are off to a good start. That was the purpose of this technical conference, was to really begin with kind of setting the stage with best practices and what's happened to date since we last issued our last order, and we've done that. So well done. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the working groups and how those are assimilated and the work that you're going to be doing. And of course, the check-in meetings that we'll have with you all to check the progress to date. Thank you so much for all the work that you're going to do, that you have done already. I really appreciate each and every one of you. So have a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you all being here and sticking with us to the end. If you have any questions or things come up that you think of, following this technical conference, please don't hesitate to reach out. With that, thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.